What up everybody, welcome back to Forever Backlogged, the show where I review my gaming backlog for your reviewing pleasure. Today, for our returning customers, we have a 2-for-1 special. Forever Backlogged, where the show format gets broken only 2 episodes in. But before we can get into any of that, we need our big, dramatic reveal. So much for that. That's right, in this episode I'll be covering both Mass Effect 1 and 2. And why both games in just one sitting, you ask? I'll explain that soon enough. Before that, let's just have a wee bit of background. Mass Effect is a sci-fi based action RPG that plays more like a third-person shooter thingamajig. It was developed by BioWare, who had already seen great success in the sci-fi thingamajig business with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. In fact, I remember a friend of mine actually describing Mass Effect to me at the time as Knights of the Old Republic without the Star Wars, which, while not completely accurate, is still a somewhat apt description.
We wanted to take what we had done with Knights of the Old Republic and take that into a new universe where there was really no limits on what you could do as a character and what we could do with the story.
Mass Effect 1 was released in 2007, with the second game coming in 2010. The last installment, or so we thought, was released in 2012, but that one I will not be covering in this video. The entire trilogy was generally very well received. As a franchise, it was hailed as one of the standards of its generation. Out of the 3, the best-selling and most acclaimed installment was number 2, but all 3 earned high praise from critics and fans alike. It is very plot-heavy, as it looks to set you in a gigantic new universe both in terms of scale and attention to detail. In fact, if you've heard anything negative about these games, it was probably the controversy surrounding the third game's story ending, and being loosely aware of it is about as far as I'm willing to go until I actually play the third one, cause you know, me and spoilers. Okay, so finally, why both games in one sitting? I actually played both these games back to back, but that's not the reason. It's mainly because of 2 other things. First, I see a lot of people online asking about and intending to skip 1 and start playing at Mass Effect 2. In terms of mechanics, 1 is easily the most dated out of the trilogy and where you'll notice the biggest drop-off when comparing to today's standards. Now, if you're asking, the short answer to whether you should skip 1 is NO! 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 But more on that later. Second, when I looked at them side by side, I felt like each game's strengths complemented the other's weaknesses, and vice versa, so it seemed a lot more appropriate to compare them in one sitting. For a bit of background on how I played them myself, I actually started the first one fairly close to its release, but I put it down shortly afterwards because if I remember correctly, my PC at the time just wasn't up to snuff. Then, when I wanted to give the whole trilogy a try, is about the same time they announced they were putting out all 3 games as a package deal, so I ended up waiting for that as well. In the end, I got the trilogy pack for the PS3, and for the life of me, I can't remember what my reasoning for that was at the time. If you don't know, if you play all 3 games on the same platform, you actually get to carry over your saved game files over, which then brings some actual continuity features and consequences across all 3 games. That is something I strongly suggest you take advantage of, but be forewarned, the PS3 port of the first game is kind of, well, horrid. It will fart load times in your face until your eyes bleed. Now, if that's your only option to play them all on the same platform, I would still say it's worth it. But if you have your choice of system, just be aware that the PS3 will make your experience with Mass Effect 1 a considerable amount crappier. Just dying will take you an ungodly amount of time to restart, or even stepping into the wrong room, which you'll do a bunch, and going back and waiting for everything to reload will be a chore. I'd then like to start off by mentioning the caveats you might find with picking any of these games up today. So, are there any? Well, the big one will be spoilers. Like I mentioned in the previous video with Final Fantasy VII, when you have such a big name game where much of the focus is on the story elements sitting in your backlog, you always run the risk of having it spoiled for you over time, especially when, like I just mentioned, the very ending of the trilogy made all the gaming news just a couple of years back. In terms of mechanics, only the first one starts to show its age by our standards now, but I'll delve into that in a second. Visuals wise, even the first one is still pretty decent, at least as far as I'm concerned. Alright, on to the reviews, starting off, as you'd expect, with Mass Effect 1. To set the stage for you a little bit, Mass Effect takes place in an alternate universe where mankind discovers alien technology on Mars, which then enables us to explore the cosmos and ultimately be part of a larger intergalactic society. By the time the game commences, though fully integrated, humans are still the new kids on the block, However, they are pushing to make headway in terms of responsibility and influence on the galactic scene in a much quicker and more aggressive manner than any of the older species before them. This adds a very interesting political backdrop to the proceedings where, despite having some optimistic supporters, mankind makes itself more of an overly ambitious nuisance in the eyes of most other species. Taking the role of Commander Shepard, it falls on you to sort of champion humanity's cause whilst trying to thwart an evil conspiracy of galactic proportions. The first thing you notice is that this massive universe that's created for you is a labor of love. Every intricate piece of history, every factoid, every description helps set you in a world so large and exquisite that it holds its own against any other sci-fi cult classic. I can especially appreciate that every interracial grievance or alliance is rooted in something tangible that the background story provides you. Very little in this world feels thrown out there just willy-nilly. As I mentioned before, the presentation is still pretty decent even by today's standards. It's in its mechanics that the game starts to show its age a little bit. The controls feel a bit wonky, the movement in the interface can be a bit clunky, the combat and the interaction can be a bit buggy. Not only that, there are a few design choices which can be frustrating. For example, I chose the Infiltrator character class, which focuses on sniper rifle use among other talents. The way the game limits your proficiency with snipers is much like Metal Gear Solid, where it's hard to actually focus the crosshair. Whereas in Metal Gear you would take pills to relax and stabilize your aim, here you depend solely on leveling up your sniper skills and acquiring better rifles towards the same effect. The problem is, only with a maxed out skill tree and top of the line rifle acquired near the end of the game did I ever feel I could be functional with a sniper, let alone having it be an actual strength. I also did not enjoy the sections where you're forced to pilot the Mako rover and the whole thing turns into a driving minigame. It just felt like an incomplete piece of fluff thrown in there for diversity's sake, where really it just takes you away from the action that's actually fun. This is one of a few examples where I feel the game's own ambition ended up costing it. Now, no doubt it's that very same ambition that made it such a great and unique game to begin with, but at the same time, some cracks do begin to show, and you're left with a feeling that they delivered on maybe 90% of that ambition, and had they just scaled it down a bit, perhaps you would have been left with a crisper game experience. But mind you, these are just minor gripes in an overall enjoyable experience. Plus there are other bright spots. For example, I much prefer the leveling system in Mass Effect 1 when compared to 2. More importantly, Mass Effect 1 is where I feel the story arc shines the brightest. You get a feel of campy 90s sci-fi where the focus is on the mystery you're forced to solve, on the characters and the politics that drive them, and on the choices you'll have to make along the way, with the actual fighting feeling like a consequence of the plot rather than its center point. And here is where I want to begin to contrast the two games. On to Mass Effect 2. Now don't get me wrong, on the second installment you're introduced to a lot of great new characters to add to the ones you already knew, but you do start to notice a shift towards a more familiar, cookie-cutter, Hollywood blockbustery type of plot and action. Plus the way the game is structured, you'll spend a lot more time doing specific character quests than actually getting on with the main plot. The flip side to that, however, is that every single gripe I mentioned with the mechanics of the first game are immediately dissipated in the second one to such a degree that it's obvious from the very second you're given control of your character. It's almost as if you're playing through one with a minor itch at the back of your head over some of the gameplay and wonkiness of it all, only to have that itch instantly subside as soon as you get your hands on the second. Plus there's also the way that space travel is handled. It gives you a real feel for the scope of the game's universe. And the tedious driving side quests are replaced with a new mining mechanic which then feeds into a very rewarding crafting system. The bad part, as I said, is that you notice a bit of a drop in storytelling as a trade-off. And this is what I meant by these games' strengths and weaknesses playing off each other, where one will excel in its storytelling while delivering a more dated gaming experience, the other will feel silky smooth in its execution only to leave some of the stronger plot points by the wayside. This is not to say that the story itself is not compelling, but if I could try and compare them using another established series, I would say Mass Effect 1 feels more like Star Trek's The Next Generation series, whereas Mass Effect 2 feels more like the J.J. Abrams remake, where the latter brings the action to the forefront and the former focuses more on the intrigue. And this is why I would urge anyone thinking of skipping Mass Effect 1 to not do so. You would be missing out on what set the Mass Effect series apart from the rest in the first place, as well as skipping some essential background to the second game's key plot points. I would even say you're perfectly okay with just rushing through it and skipping any side quests if that's what it takes. Even if you're only looking forward to a more refined gaming experience in the form of Mass Effect 2, I cannot stress how important it is that you finish number 1 first. If not for anything else, consider this: much of which the sequels are based on are callbacks to the previous entries, which will go right over your head without playing the previous title. In fact, let me compare them to yet another sci-fi classic.
Oh, come on!
Imagine watching The Matrix Reloaded without watching the original first. Sure, you might get a kick out of the great action sequences and ultimately be pleased with the whole thing, but you would miss out on what made the first one such a tremendous cultural experience to begin with. So how does this all translate into my own recommendation of should you move Mass Effect 1 into up or down your own backlog? I promise that whole sideways somewhere in between option will make sense in a future episode. I would say moving Mass Effect 1 up your backlog is essential, while you're then okay with however you want to move Mass Effect 2. Like I've been saying, only on 1 does it start to feel you're getting a dated gameplay experience. Couple that with running the risk of having the story spoiled for you, I would say to get to it as early as you can manage. Number 2 still plays like a game you would see released nowadays, so there won't be any issue with setting it aside for something else. This is not to say you won't get an immediate urge to follow 1 up as soon as you finish it. I know I did. Just that I would stress giving 1 a chance ASAP, while you're fine with then leaving 2 behind for a time if you want to get into something else in the meanwhile. Overall, I really enjoyed playing through both of them, especially when you can get some perspective with looking at them like a package deal and sort of forgive what little shortcomings they have, knowing the other game will make up for them. Another great plus, I found anyway, that I want to mention was that there are some choices which you feel have an actual cultural impact on the game world, not just limited to your run-of-the-mill good guy bad guy answers that ultimately lead you down the same way. That's my review, guys. Let me know your own thoughts on the Mass Effect series, or if my video pushed you towards giving it a try. As for Mass Effect 3, I still have not played it as of yet, but I intend to soon, and I will of course be sharing my thoughts on it. I did want to say this though, me not playing Mass Effect 3 right after 2 has nothing to do with it making me lose interest or anything like that. It's just that I wanted to get to other things in my backlog and save it as a treat for later. As you'll begin to see, I also try to vary gameplay styles as I go through my backlog to keep things fresh whenever possible. That's the end of the show, guys. Please keep the feedback coming. I've received some great advice so far, but we're only 2 episodes in, so there's still a long way to go, and there's still a lot to improve on, I feel. I have to say, I was a bit surprised at the amount of love I got for a fledgling channel, so thanks so much for watching and for all your support. Also, I must apologize. I meant to have this video out a lot sooner, but hardware problems and just life in general got in the way. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like if you did, and please subscribe if you want to check out future videos as they come out. Take care, everybody. I will see you soon.